Second.
Thank you. Okay. I read the novel. It is an advanced copy. It's absolutely fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
And it is so rich and multi-layered. And I have a question about the structure. There was just so much moving around and confusion. There was like this experience of cognitive dissonance in the reader, which I thought was really, it felt like the kind of confusion, perhaps, of being in that place. So that I really enjoyed. The second half, it took a while till, I'm not going to say it, but I figured out what was going on with the structure. But did you plan that at first, the sort of dislocating of time, the way that you progressed through part two? How did you decide to come to this very unusual structure and story?
The structure is pretty unusual. You know, in the West, we have our beginning, middle, end story. We have the Freytag's pyramid, or whatever they call it. It's rising action denouement. But you know, I like to look at the different ways stories come out from people who've been traumatized. And these are people who, I think the basic idea is that, you know, to tell painful stories to relive the pain. And you know when something bad happens and you call your mom and you tell her on the phone, you start crying, you know. And I think people who've been traumatized come up with a lot of strategies to try to tell their stories without having their stories hurt them. One thing they do is they fragment it, and they put it into little pieces instead of putting it together where the power is at its maximum. They take it out of chronology. You know, then it doesn't have that momentum and inertia. They try to change causality in many ways, and that can come through distancing techniques, shifting perspectives or point of view, or rearranging the structure. And, you know, just a lot of the narratives I read of traumatized people came out in the most unexpected ways, because at all times they're trying to maximize the degree of catharsis that they get from needing to take control of their story by telling it, while trying to minimize the amplifying power of narrative. That when it comes together, it's our most powerful meaning-making system. When the details are charged with significance, when the chronology is working, when you care about what happens next, when we're revealing in multiple layers, a story can just really hurt someone, especially the teller. And I think it would have been wrong for me to tell this in a Western. It all started when, my bad few years in North Korea started one sunny day, and then at the end. So I knew that fragmentation was going to be a part of it at the beginning. And I knew that I had to get the voices of propaganda to be in the book. And I read a lot and listened to a lot of propaganda. And it's so terrifyingly boring. It's so horrible and mundane and unnerving and lie-ridden. But these people are forced to listen to it all day in their loudspeakers, on their factory floors and in their housing blocks. How do you get the reality across without feeling that constant torrent of propaganda? So I knew that would have to be part of the book. I tried to make it maybe a little funny.
It's very funny. Yeah.
And maybe that was the wrong tack. I don't know. But I don't know the other way to get it in without completely killing the reading experience.
It seemed like it was about the power of storytelling and defining oneself through the power to tell one's own story. I mean, you just played with narrative on so many levels.
You're very perceptive.
Really
Honorary PhD.
She's a book reviewer.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to read that.
Thank you. I'm sure people want to get to the wine. I don't want to keep people too long. Raveen, yes.
So, a two-part question. You know, one of the reasons I really took an interest in this book is because I'm fascinated by the issue of propaganda and propaganda in America. Because America, to me, is like one of the freest countries, free speech, all the stuff, you know, free press. And I want to bring your observation from North Korea in a fictional setting to America in a non-fiction setting. And my question, first part of the question is, on a scale of 0 to 10, if the level of propaganda in North Korea is a 10, where would you put current day United States?
Wow.
So think about that. And my second part of the question is that there's a line here which I thought was very revealing. It's on page 135. I marked it. If you don't mind just reading that one line, and just it's on the same topic, and just kind of like tell us a little bit of your thought process behind that one sentence.
The first 100 pages of the book take place on the east coast of North Korea, in Cheongjin, which I could talk about all day. But through a twist of fate, our main character, who starts off as a model citizen and does everything he's told, hopefully across the book he comes to take control of his own story and become a character as maybe we would think of one. But through a twist of fate, he meets Americans and he goes to America. And by that point in the book, I was like, I saw the Americans through what I believe to be the North Korean perspective, and I was like, maybe this book's gonna work. And you know, like the North Koreans kept asking, why do the Mexicans defect to America? You know? But here's the line being pointed out: when the dogs returned, the senator gave them treats from his pocket, and John Doe understood that in communism, you threaten a dog into compliance, while in capitalism, obedience is obtained through bribes. You know, I live in America, so I think I'm blind to a lot of the propaganda here. And maybe I like to think I've grown a little bit by inhabiting another culture, another perspective. I know people probably, I can see people shifting in their seats. So maybe one more?
I spent some time in China in the early 70s before the West was in China.
Wow.
So a lot of what you're saying is just like dead on to my own experiences. But there was an interesting exception in mine. So my question is, did you see the same exception? And that is the children. When I was in China, you know, everybody was same shade of lipstick, everybody wore gray and green, it was just exactly as you described it. But the children were kind of at a different level. They were free, they wore colorful clothes, because I'm tall and, you know, same deal. They stared at you with eyes open as you walked past, and nobody seemed to correct them or shush them out of the way or something. It was clear that at some point in their lives they were going to turn into all those other people. But when they were being children, they seemed to just kind of let them be children. And I just wonder what that aspect was.
That's
like.
a great question. I don't think I got into close proximity to too many children. I mean, you know, I would see maybe families having picnics in the distance. These minders, there were 5 of them. And they did a ballet through Pyongyang, tried to hide every human dimension to it. You just can't believe it. And, you know, even when we were in the countryside, I was struck by unaccompanied children. And it's probably, like I said, it's a place where there's probably very little crime, almost probably no crime because of the monopoly of violence by the state. But I saw toddlers walking the roads and crossing the streets. I mean, 3-year-olds, 2.5-year-olds, and obviously they feel safe and comfortable. I never got close to a child. But I want to say one anecdote before we go. When they took us to the Korean History Museum, and the first exhibit they had there, they took us into the room, and there was, in Pyongyang, whenever there's no evidence for anything, they paint a big mural as proof, or they make a diorama. And in the center of the room, they had a little plexiglass box, and of course, the people who are the docents in the museums are they just are trained to recite a script. They don't have PhDs in anthropology or anything. But in this plexiglass box, there was a piece of skull, and she explained to me that this was found on the shores of the Taedong River. It was 4.25 million years old, and it was the oldest artifact of humanity on Earth. And then they had a big map of the human diaspora starting in Pyongyang and moving up into Asia, finally up into Europe, and they had different color arrows, and finally colonizing Africa and then going down into America. And there were other dioramas. And I said to her, not the Rift Valley? And I asked her, I said, is this an Australopithecine? She looked at me like terrified. I didn't want to get anyone in trouble. And so finally she ended by saying, and so, we're all Korean. And she said, and you are Korean. And one of my partners turned to me and said, Professor Johnson, how do you feel? And, there's no irony there. Speaking on any secondary level is dangerous, and it does not exist. And I said, I don't know, I think I feel a little Korean. He said, I think you look a little Korean. And all the minders nodded. I said, I think I'm a little more Korean. And so that was the reality there. And before I go, I just want to point out Chris Lee's here. She's a wonderful writer, and she has a book of short stories called Drifting House coming out from Viking in March. Stories set in South Korea and in the North. And it's one of those books that's getting rave reviews. And she's lived in Seoul, and she's befriended defectors and taken their oral histories in person, not over the internet, and and she's talked with people that they've come out of the Hanwon and befriended and helped them. So if you want to know more, I would grab a hold of her before she goes. Thanks for coming out tonight.